I think the reason why we're all here today is, the topic was master builders, and it was kind of honoring the legacy and these experienced individuals that have been around for a really long time. And what do we do? How do we get that information and knowledge and experience from them? And what are we doing in our own businesses, or what are we seeing in different specific industries? What's out there to share that knowledge? I think a lot of times there's years of service and a long time that it gets to say this person achieved this and they've become so respected in their role because of their knowledge. And how did they get there? And how does someone young in the industry, someone even older but just entering the industry, how do we extract that information, and how do we make sure that the path that they've built and the way that an individual has brought up the industry on their own, how are we continuing to share that and get better as a group? So we have a couple different things, but first we have some good statistics. So Adam Crow with the Fort Collins Larimer County Economic Development Manager, he'll come up and kind of speak to some of the numbers behind it and where we're at from an age standpoint. So welcome, Adam.
You'd be surprised how cheap it is to get somebody to say yay and then your name in the back of a room. Is there a remote? Oh, thank you very much. I would like to say, because we just heard about the WOTC and the federal bonding, the number one thing that we hear as economic developers, especially when we bring up bonding, is no, that's too good to be true. We're not even going to pay attention to that. But it is true, and it is good. So encourage you all to take a look at it. It's a great program. And now I do need to focus because I have 10 minutes and I could spend all day looking at those misty mountains. So I'm kind of glad that I get an opportunity to focus on data because that's very enticing. So Adam Crow, I'm with Larimer County Economic and Workforce Development. Quick question for you all before I start on the data. Are any of you experiencing transitions in your workforce? There are not enough hands in the air. Okay, yeah. Well, there will be more hands in the air as our years march on over the next 5 to 10 years. And for those of you who are experiencing those transitions, get used to it because those transitions aren't going away. We're going to see some pretty major shifts, and those start with our demographics. So there are some things happening in just our Northern Colorado community and in our country that you can't fight. You can't fight demographics. They happen, right? So if we were to focus in very locally, so Larimer County, this is a chart that shows the age ranges at different ages, right? Or the numbers at different ages, so our generations. And you can see here, maybe I don't, oh, I do have a little button. So our big blue one here are our folks that are in college, and this is the CSU effect. So we do have a lot of young folks that are coming in to come to this university in Larimer County. And if we were to look at this, these are our youngest folks that are just being born. They're in grade school. That number's pretty low. And that is a challenge in Northern Colorado, but specifically in Larimer County, we just don't have as many kids here. So we're hearing some challenges with our school district and such. We do have a fair number of millennials, but you see that a lot of them are coming in after they have some money and they can afford to live here. So they're bringing their families with them, which drives up these numbers a little bit, but not a ton. And then, of course, our Gen X is pretty small. So anybody who's Gen X, you probably look around in your workforce and you kind of wonder where the rest of you are, because there's a lot of millennials and there's a lot of folks that are nearing retirement age, which is right here. You can see that bubble. So this is going to be fairly significant as we see folks transitioning out of the workforce and retiring. And then if we look at this 10 years in the future, we can see that the projections are that everything that we just talked about is going to be exaggerated, right? We're going to have more young folks that come in for college but don't necessarily stay. That's partially affordability and partially because they find jobs elsewhere. But we can also see millennials are still big. Gen X are going to be our retirees and those folks that are getting pretty close. But that's a smaller generation, so that may not be as quite an impact in 10 years. And then we still have fairly small numbers here. Now, let's switch over and look at Weld County, because this is a very different story. many more young folks. And pay attention to that because that's going to matter as we look at the next set of slides after these. And you can see there's a bit of dip here in that those young folks do leave Weld County instead of come in like we do in Larimer County. They do leave Weld County and they go elsewhere. So there is some retention around population, especially around young folks to think about. And then, of course, people are moving in these I'm getting my career started, my family started years, because it's a more affordable place to live in northern Colorado. And then, of course, you can see fewer Gen Xers, and then a fewer older folks that are getting closer to retirement, but still a significant number. So, again, in 10 years, an exaggerated version of this. But you can see all of those millennials that have moved in to Weld County, they will get to retirement soon after that, or be getting pretty close to that. And the other thing to really pay attention to when we think about this generation here, our millennials, is that they are entering leadership positions much more quickly. And that's because there aren't enough Gen Xers to fill all of those positions. So thinking about those accelerated, how do we not only retain and honor the skills of our folks that are those masters that may be retiring soon, but how do we transition those not just to our Gen Xers, but into our millennials who may be younger than we're used to doing that with. All right, so moving along, we want to look at these same stats, but we want to overlay it with our race and ethnicity. So this becomes very interesting in Larimer County in that you can see this blue here are all of our white non-Hispanic folks, and then our people of color reside down here in these more colorful bars. And much of that in-migration that we were talking about, you can see is definitely on display. But if we look at births right here at age 0, you can see that 1/3 of the folks that are born in Larimer County are a person of color, which is significantly higher than we've seen in the past. So through natural growth, we are seeing northern Colorado diversify. So also thinking about a much more diverse workforce, a much more diverse population moving into the future decades. So if we're to look at this in Weld County, strikingly different, right? So again, lots of in-migration when we think about our blue, our white non-Hispanic folks. But then when we look at our people of color, especially our folks that fall into the Hispanic and Latino communities, they're over half of the births right now in Weld County. So very quickly diversifying. And when we think about where is workforce going to live in the future, where is there room for housing, it is in Weld County. So when we think about your workforce of the future, it's going to be a much more diverse workforce, those folks that you're recruiting. And we want to pay attention to that because it's going to play out in some of our slides coming up, especially around our changing work. So if we're to look at the generations right now that are in our workforce, based on those last slides we looked at, it's probably not a surprise that getting pretty close to half the workforce are our millennials. That's why they're moving into leadership positions much more quickly than we've seen in the past. We can see here that our Gen X, smaller, but still holds a pretty tidy size. These folks are going to continue to grow. And in fact, we will have our millennials and our Gen Zers be about 2/3 of our workforce here pretty quickly. And then, of course, it's these 14% here that are retiring, but they have so many important skills and so much great experience. How do we make sure that that gets transitioned as they start to transition out? So moving along, that becomes really important because when we think about demographics, demographics also play a part when we think about some of the other big shifts that are just attaching to or happening within our job market or our economy, period. So this is a graph that I shared at a similar all-partnership meeting almost 9 months ago. But what it does is it talks about, or it shows in these bar graphs, where the growth and the shrinkage in the job market is going to be based on AI and automation over the next 10 years. So these positions up here in the light blue, these are the ones that are going to grow the most. And then it's by how many million over here, so 6.5 million when we look at our health professions. As you look at these gray bars at the bottom, those are the occupations that are going to shrink. They're the ones that are going to be most impacted. So when we look at this, you can see that the numbers are much higher. So 20.1 million over that amount of time, or at least 18% of that 20 million are going to be affected. So when we think about your workers of the future, it's not just those young folks that are being born, but it's also those people that are being transitioned out of their current job and need to find a new job and need to transition those skills. And if we think about the people that are in our production work, our food service, our customers service and sales, and our office support, they don't necessarily have the perfect skill set through their work experience to enter into construction. So there's going to have to be some training that happens in order to get them to a place where they can do the work, right? Or essentially be productive on the job. The other thing to think about with these folks is that when we look at those occupations and we look at the demographics, they are disproportionately women and people of color. So we're going to talk about what the demographics are within the construction industry, and it'll kind of highlight why that's important. So keep this in mind, because this is, again, another talent pool that needs to be considered as we're thinking about transitions and who's going to replace workforce in the future. So if we look at our construction workforce, your age breakdown when it comes to construction, all occupations within the construction industry is actually pretty well spread, which is very nice, and it's much better than it was 10 years ago. So you all have done a good job of bringing in younger workers, showing the potential, helping them advance. Now, there are certain occupations, especially in some of the skilled trades, where we see that there is a higher number of people that are going to retire soon. So it's kind of occupational, but as a whole, the construction industry is doing pretty well. But we don't want to forget those specific occupations. If we look at our breakdown when it comes to our race and ethnicity, construction does a pretty nice job of reflecting what Northern Colorado's actual diversity is, and that there is a pretty good breakdown. So again, it seems to be, at least right now, a fairly inclusive industry as far as bringing those folks in, but are we also helping them move into those leadership positions because they are, again, the workforce of the future? All right, so then the next one, this is where construction struggles. And it's with our gender gap, right? And if we think about all of those workers that are going to be available because of the transitions out of AI and the transitions out because of automation, there are going to be plenty more women than men that are affected by that. So again, available labor pools, focusing on women, how do we build leaders within the construction industry, and how do we make sure that those skills are being passed along, again, to people who fit the dynamics and the demographics of our future workforce. All right, so this one I also like to show because it is a good way of looking at when people are thinking about the construction industry, what occupations were they in? When people are thinking, or this blue line represents people that are currently in the construction industry, and then these are the occupations that led them to their current position, which is right here, and then these are the positions that they leave. Now, within construction, which is kind of fascinating, is that there are a lot of already construction-oriented positions over here that lead into other construction-oriented positions, which then lead to other construction-oriented positions, right? So people are staying in the industry as they're transitioning through jobs, which is good. However, there is also some leakage. So if you look at this gap down here, there are fewer people coming into construction-related jobs than there are people leaving construction-related jobs. So there is still a retention challenge there. And you can see some of those jobs that people are transitioning into here. So computer user support specialist. I'm not exactly sure why that would be what people go into, but it's a fairly large number of people that would move from construction into that industry. You all would probably know better. But thinking about when people are in the industry, do they stay in it, and what does that trajectory look like for them? And I know the partnership has been working on that. But then if they are leaving the industry, where are they going to and why is pretty important. And that's what this chart is basically saying to us. Construction's pretty good at keeping workers. However, there are still people that are leaking out and going to completely different occupations. All right. That's it. I don't know if I have time for questions, but